Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar this evening. We know that there are a lot of people who are returning and some newcomers, and we welcome everybody. People are starting to queue into the room. And so again, welcome to everybody who's joining us. I'm Bari Norman. You'll hear from my colleagues, Sasha DeWind and Leslie Singer in a few moments, but just a couple of housekeeping items just to get started. We have a lot of questions that came in before the webinar, so thank you so much for sending those in, and we are going to try to get to everything. Please make sure that if you have questions as we're speaking, that you submit them to us live. We'll be keeping an eye on that as well, but if you could do so in the Q&A tab, that would be helpful. There's also a chat mode, but if you could go put the questions into Q&A, that would be most helpful, and we'll see them there. And yeah, we encourage you to participate. We have a lot to cover. We're going to try to do it all in an hour. We have a little bit of extra time if we need it. But yes, welcome and thank you so much for participating. I will send it on over to Leslie Singer, who is our moderator this evening.
I think you already said most of everything. I'm Leslie Singer of Brown Harris Stevens, and I always do these things as added value for my clients. And I love doing this with Bari Norman of Expert Admissions and Sasha DeWind of Tutor Associates. So I think we're going to start the evening with a poll, right?
We do indeed. We would love to get a sense of what ages people are, what age your kids are, your students are. So if you could answer our poll so we can also adjust our discussion accordingly, that would be great. And people are submitting their responses still, and keep them coming. It looks like we have mostly 11th graders from what I can see so far, followed by 10th graders, but it looks like pretty much we're done. All right, so it looks like we have a good portion, over half of the students or parents here have juniors, and then followed by 10th graders. I will share results here. You can see, so we've got 11th graders, and then we've got 10th graders followed by other, so maybe some people who are a little bit younger, and then 12th graders, and then a small number of 9th graders. So welcome to everybody.
So this is fabulous. We're going to have some more traditional conversations like we used to pre-COVID. But let's just, because there are some seniors and I'm sure there's some anxious 11th graders, let's start talking about the testing and the status of the SAT and ACT. Are students testing? Do schools still require these tests? What if their child can't test? Sasha, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Leslie. Yes, well, it's certainly been a bumpy fall. The sort of short answer is that some kids are testing and other kids are finding that their tests are canceled or their sites are canceled. Each individual testing site is responsible for canceling. So some kids may be testing in New York and other kids may not be able to. And so the large majority of our seniors have been able to test. But not everyone has, and there's certainly the colleges for those seniors are really understanding, and that's why they are test optional, which we'll certainly talk more about. But most of my seniors have had the opportunity to test at least once, if not twice, and we are working hard with our students to make sure they have the opportunity to test, most of all because they've worked really hard to sit for these tests. And whether or not they send them, this may be the year they don't have to, but they want to sit for the test. And so we are working hard to make sure that happens. And then in terms of the SAT and ACT in general, well, they're all happening. They're happening in person. They are not online. There is no online version yet. They are both thinking of launching online testing, but there's no exact word on when that will happen. And for now, they're banking on adding test dates and having safety precautions in place so that students can test and they can test safely. In terms of the future of testing, there are some exceptions to what I'm going to say. Tufts and the UC system, and we can talk about all of those schools. But for the most part, schools are reluctantly test optional right now. They very much would like to see scores. And if you have them even now, they want to see them. And for our current juniors, sophomores, and younger, I would count on these schools returning to requiring the ACT or the SAT. And there are always going to be a handful of test optional schools, but sending amazing scores will always benefit our students. And overwhelmingly, these tests are not going anywhere.
Can you talk about, for someone though right now who cannot get a seat, what do you suggest they do? I'm glad to hear most people are getting tested. You've had positive results with that, but.
Sure. So for our juniors, I would say just be patient. I know it's frustrating. Some of you are ready to test, some of you, but you'll have to be patient. There's a whole spring and summer and fall to test, and you're going to have to be patient and flexible, which is kind of the whole year for us. For those seniors, and Bari can speak more to the way that the applications are addressing this, but certainly if you can't test, it will not be held against you this year for applications. And that's very important because there will be kids who have not been able to test.
Yeah, it's I agree with Sasha. So it is the case that if you haven't been able to test, that it won't be held against you. But if you can submit scores, strong scores, whatever that means for the particular school you're applying to, it's a good thing. One, you'll be able to predict better what will actually happen. We know already this year, as I said back in the spring, applications are up. This is no surprise, and they're particularly up at highly selective schools. So UVA announced last week or so, 35% increase in early decision applications, 15% increase in early action. The early number out of Columbia is 49% increase in ED. The applications are up at Georgia Tech. The numbers are just trickling out now, but they're big. The increases are big, and it's not just in undergraduate admissions. We have an increase of 52% in law school applications already from this October to last October, and the deadlines haven't even nearly passed yet, including early decision deadlines for law school. So we're seeing this across the board, that applications are up. We are not surprised. If you can submit scores, it will be helpful because again, you're giving them something they know what to do with, and you can predict better. But that said, it's still true at the same time that if you can't test, and you need to not send scores, or by the way, if you can test and strategically you don't want to send scores, which is where my students who are not sending scores, I think there was literally one person in our whole practice who could not test, like literally had it canceled 5 times. But everybody else has been able to test, but about a little bit more than a third of our students aren't submitting. That's all strategic. So, it depends sort of on the why, but without the scores, it's going to be harder to predict. And that's why we're seeing this surge in applications.
And yes, for this year, Bari's talking about strategic decisions. For this year, I see some questions in the chat about a senior who maybe could test, but doesn't have the ideal score. Bari and I, if you don't have to send scores, if they're not going to help you, they're not worth sending. Scores are meant to help you. Usually that is the 75th percentile or above at admitted students. And you can kind of easily access data about what sort of the range of admitted students are getting on those tests. And you can think about whether or not your scores really help their numbers or not. But I think it's important that the seniors this year really do have a bit of a strange year. They can and should use scores that are strong and will help their applications. But for those kids who have fantastic grades and didn't hit their scores, they do kind of have an out that they will not have next year.
Yeah. The one thing that I think also makes sense to say is that when we say scores sort of help you, I think of scores in terms of can they hold you back? Because scores never actually help you at anywhere you want to go, right? So the places you really want to go, you just want them to look at your scores for about 3 seconds and move on. That is the ideal situation. When they have to stop for a moment, that's when you're in trouble. Or when they have to kind of say, well, the scores are low, or this is a concern, that's what you don't want. And so some of you out there may be choosing to send scores to some schools and not others. Be extra careful when you're filling out your Common App, that you are very, very careful about that. And even if you can't see it in the preview, it doesn't mean the colleges can't see it. So really make sure the scores are just not entered in at all for the schools you're going test optional to, even if you can mark, I don't want to use my scores. Just a little sort of friendly reminder about that. But really what we want is scores that aren't going to hold you back. And as Sasha said, and I agree, that means being up near that 75th percentile. There's a question in the chat about what is a good score. It depends on the school that you're applying to, but really look at that middle 50%. If you're not on the upper end or outside of that range, then realistically the scores aren't going to do anything for you. And it probably makes sense to hold them back. I mean, it's a case by case, it's on a case-by-case basis, but as generic advice, I would say that for sure.
Can you talk about super scoring? I mean, I know some people can't, have only had the opportunity to sit once, but if you've had the opportunity to sit a few times.
Super scoring is an interesting thing because it's kind of in flux now with the ACT. So I'll talk about what it means,
please,
and I can talk about how the two tests work with it. So super scoring is the practice of mixing and matching multiple sections across different days to get a super score. So you did really well in math one day and pretty well in verbal, then the next day it switches and you do amazingly on verbal and really well in math. A super score puts your best verbal and your best math together and gives you a super score. And a lot of colleges will super score SAT scores. They like to see a higher overall score for their accepted students, and certainly our students don't rely heavily on super scoring. They're just trying to get great scores. And we always want to send a concise testing portfolio of just really ideally one fantastic score. But there are many situations where two sets of scores look great and will give a better super score. And certainly we use that when it's appropriate. The ACT, traditionally schools haven't super scored the ACT. They've sort of leaned towards just one composite from one day. The ACT has recently made a big push for super scoring on their own test, sort of preempting this by providing a score report with a super score, with encouraging schools to accept their super scores, and by backing it up with data about why the super score is a good idea. It still comes down to a college, what they will and won't do. Some colleges will super score the SAT and not the ACT. Some will do both. Some don't super score. I guess I would say, as someone who helps plan the sort of course of a kid's testing year, I don't rely on super scoring. I think it's a little bit over emphasized. Sometimes it works in the end to do it, but I'm going for whatever the goal is. Let's get one amazing score that we're proud to send. Let's do it at the right time, and let's not, fuzzy it up with too many scores. Barry, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and if you're applying to highly selective schools, like even more so, a human being cannot unsee what they see. So even if you're technically getting to use your super score as like the official score, they see your full testing record that you submit. And you can't, for SAT or ACT, submit individual sections. You must submit the whole test date, even if they're only going to use a single section, let's say from one test date and another section from another test date. So they see it. And just as you would, if you were looking at a lot of applications and you saw a student do kind of, poorly, for whatever that means at your institution, but poorly the first time and then get a great score the second time, I mean, I'll tell you what I did as an admissions officer, and I can see it, when we're kind of strategizing for our students, is someone's going to say, well, is that high score really high, or is it just artificial? Because if that's really the score, they would have had something close to that, both times, right? So you don't want to give them information that, kind of muddies things, and they can't unsee what you show them. And so your goal should be for the best composite. Your goal should be for the best SAT score combining the two sections. It is, as Sasha said, more common for schools to super score the SAT, but no matter what, you want to have a good showing, whatever you're giving them, however many test dates you're giving. And ideally you're giving certainly no more than 3, but ideally sticking with 2, but not more than 3. And so basically what you're trying to do is to, like Sasha said, really hit it in one shot as best you can. And when you don't, because a lot of people are taking it at least twice for sure, and might be submitting 2 scores, you don't have to be concerned about that as long as there's not a really significant gap in what you're showing. But remember, like, yes, they're technically using a super score, but they're judging you based on all the information and data that they have.
But do you take a test, you absolutely have to send it? Let's say,
Yeah. So my short answer is you have a lot of control over who sees your scores. They make you pay money to release them and send them. It's a business. So the short answer is that with the College Board and with the ACT, if you take a test, no, you don't have to send it. But the ACT and the College Board are different in terms of the ways they present that, and different schools have different policies. So the ACT allows students to go in and delete their scores whenever they want, after they see them at any point. And the SAT really doesn't. I'm sure if I could find my login, my scores would still be there from a long time ago. And the College Board, they'll just sit there forever. They don't allow you to delete them unless you kind of cancel them ahead of time. And then schools will ask for everything. Schools will ask for whatever you want to send them. And you should work with your high school counselor or your counselors to figure out the right scores to send. Some high school transcripts include them. So it's just a dialogue you have with your high school. But in general, we think, I know Bari does too, you should only be sitting for these tests when you're ready. And then you have a lot of control over what you send ultimately.
Yeah, and that touches upon a point we were talking about before, and it's a question that came in about kind of getting, especially for juniors who are getting nervous and just trying to get in to take a test, fearing that there won't be space later. It does you no good to sit for a test that you're going to yield a score that you can't use. So it's just wasted time, as much as, I understand the kind of the urge to say, oh my gosh, we might not have the opportunity later, let's get it in now. But again, if it's not a usable score, it doesn't really do anything for you. And so it's better to think about testing as a spring, even summer. We know they're going to add test dates because they're going to be closures, right? We know that already, even though they haven't been announced, there are going to be closures this winter. And even in the spring, they'll add test dates again, just like they did this year. It's in their interest for their survival, the testing company's survival, they will add them as they did this year. And there'll be opportunities in the fall as well. And so while we all would love to get the testing over as early as possible, it's rarely, no offense, Sasha, it's rarely people's favorite part of the process. Although Sasha and her crew make it better and more manageable and make it so you have to take it fewer times. But, we ideally all want that part over as soon as possible, but it's only over when you have the usable score. Also, something just I forgot to mention before, as a piggyback on what Sasha was saying, ACT is doing all this stuff to generate a new score report and to encourage this use of super score. That's great for them. Colleges are going to do what they want to do. And even if they give them this information, they're not necessarily going to use it, and they're still going to judge you based on all the information they have. So as the noise kind of raises from ACT, the noise level is going to rise, right? They're going to start announcing all these great things to ensure their livelihood and ensure their relevance. But that doesn't mean that colleges adjust what they're doing and how they look at things. So you always need to remember that and make sure that you tune out that noise as it gets announced with the year progressing. And they're going to come out with a lot of stuff that's going to make it easier for kids to test and make it more attractive for kids to want to take the ACT, for instance. And so just be mindful of these announcements as they come out.
Going back a little bit, how does one even know you're not a senior, maybe you're a sophomore or junior? How do you know which test is the better test for you? How do you figure out an SAT versus an ACT?
Yeah, it's back to the basics. These
Yeah,
are the COVID questions. I love it. So yes, as I said, I certainly think the vast majority of our kids will be required to send either an SAT or ACT next fall. I see a question about that in the chat as well. And yeah, I would count on it. So the question then is, which test, when do I take it, and how do I maximize my growth on that test? We usually start kids with full-length diagnostics in an ACT and an SAT with whatever accommodations they have or don't have on these tests. Some kids already come in with a strong preference. They've taken the PSAT, they've taken a plan at school, they have certain accommodations that lend themselves to a test. But I think of these tests as comparable tests, right? They both test reading and they both test math and they both test grammar. And I think of them as sort of like different languages. They have their own rules, they have their own things that kids like and their own things that kids don't like. And so for me, the best thing is to sort of get as much data as I can. And then that gives me the sort of the what, where a kid is. And then we dig in really intensely to the why. Why are the scores the way they are? Is it all timing? Is it not timing at all? Did you hate a test? Did you not hate the test? Did you hate the non-calculator section on the SAT? Do you love your calculator? People feel things about their calculators. And so I think you start with the what, the diagnostics, and then you dig into the why, and then you can put together a plan. I think they are different tests. The ACT is generally a test of timing. They do not give you a lot of time to do what they ask you to do. You guys can all pick up an ACT and try to do the reading in the time they give you. It's fast paced. And the SAT, it's not so much a test of timing. It's a trickier test. And I think that sometimes I look at the answer choices and I think they're all right, or they're all wrong. So that will happen more with the College Board. So I think you can get familiar with the diagnostics. You can dig in, and then from there, if the data doesn't tell you, that the kid usually tells you.
I think also one thing in terms of timing, when I agree with Sasha, full length diagnostics of each test is best. Don't do these like little hybrid shortcuts, because they're shortcuts and you don't want to do that with this when you're making a decision about which test is better. And in terms of timing, we typically advise students to be doing this toward the end of 10th grade. And so that way you have time to space them out. You're not taking them 2 days in a row, or you feel like, oh my God, I got to do this all in a weekend. You have time to actually analyze and see, which one is better, and to have the conversation. And then you can get your testing schedule and plan and your tutor in place in advance of getting started, let's say at the beginning of 11th grade, and it's all set to go by the time you finish 10th. And so if you're younger, this is something that you should be thinking about as a 10th grader, but I would say more, towards the last couple of months of school.
Yeah. Diagnosing it early is always good, right? So that to me is exactly, it's June after 10th grade is the time and then you might say, I'm not getting started right away. Doing the diagnostic does not mean doing tutoring or taking the test. It just means knowing which test you're picking and sort of putting a roadmap together.
Our students typically aren't starting the tutoring right then. They're just getting their game plan and their schedule and their tutor secured for when they get back from the summer. They're not spending all summer tutoring, and in certain cases you might use the summer a little bit, but it really is not the typical plan that you would do.
This summer, so many kids were stuck at home, so they all did it. But normally they're often wonderful trips and they shouldn't be doing it.
We hope we'll be back to that.
So.
There's a couple of questions. Sorry, Leslie. There's a couple of questions about the essay section.
Yeah.
I'll just say just a couple words about it, and then Sasha can take it over. But I literally don't even ask my students what their score was on the essay section to give you a sense of how unimportant it is to admissions. But Sasha, you should speak to it as well.
People always tell people to take it with the essay because lots of schools have it as a requirement, and we don't care about the essay score at all, and no one ever cares about the essay score. We do like our kids to be prepared for anything they have to do from a sort of psychological perspective. But other than that, I mean, we're just looking at the composite and the 4 sections on the ACT, or we're looking at the total score in the 2 sections on the SAT. Nobody's talking about the essay.
You were talking about planning. Are subjects tests still part of the plan? And should that be should you be factoring that into your planning process?
So traditionally, for the most selective schools, subject tests have been a part of the plan. And I want to say that they've always been a much smaller piece of the puzzle. The ACT and the SAT scores are far more important. They were far more important. They are far more important, and they will be. But the subject tests were already sort of going away fewer and fewer requiring them. And they were kind of a holdout of Georgetown and the engineering schools and a few other Ivies there, here and there. And so most of our kids worked hard to get 2 of them and sent them, and they usually benefited their application, but were a small piece of it. This past 6 months, we've seen a really big shift away from subject tests. So the engineering schools in particular, who used to want a chem, physics, math 2 kind of subject test, they've really said they won't even look at them anymore. Georgetown hasn't said anything yet. So for those who love Georgetown, it is possible that subject tests are likely that they'll be recommended next year. But for the most part, I think they're going to be an afterthought of the application process. And if there's an easy win in there, we'll always go for it. Otherwise, the focus should be on other things.
Yeah, and I've seen that in the application process. So as of now, there are 0 colleges in the United States that require subject tests, just to give you a sense. And they were, kind of on their last legs pre-COVID. And then I think with COVID, it was sort of like the final nail in the coffin, really. And in the past, it really has been, if you could get it done with relative ease and get your scores that you need, which for schools that really were looking at it, that meant above a 750 on 2 tests and on 3 tests if you wanted Georgetown, because Georgetown is always the anomaly with everything. But if you weren't going to be able to get that, it wasn't worth your time. And you can get into places fine without them. So you didn't waste like kind of much needed time, let's say, to put into the ACT or the SAT where it would make a difference. So I've had plenty of students get into Yale and Duke and Penn and all these places with no subject tests when they weren't, as long as they weren't required, because we weren't going to be able to give them what they would need for it to actually benefit them. And then for the kids where they could benefit them, we submitted it. And what does that do? It just reinforces an already strong testing profile. So it's never really adding any real information. If it was, it would be problematic, right? If you had high subject test scores that were giving you new information, that meant that the regular test scores aren't strong and or your transcript isn't strong, which means you didn't have a chance anyway. So subject tests for a long time have been more like a reinforcement. But I think in terms of like their relevance, they're really like basically on their way out. And Sasha's making a reference to places like Caltech that are now test blind for subject tests, meaning that even if you submit them, they will not look at them. So they're really taking it a step further. That's different from test optional, where if you want to submit them, or recommended submit them if you want. If you don't, it doesn't hurt you. This is, we won't even look at them, even if you submit them. And I think that the subject test will go more in that direction.
So we have a very specific question though. And what do you say to this? Does the timing of testing Algebra 2 matter?
Sure,
Should we tell them not to test, or?
Sure. So with the SAT and the ACT, certainly our students have to have some content to be able to master those tests. And Algebra 2 is one of the things you need to be able to hit high marks on the ACT math. So many kids take Algebra 2 Trig or some sort of Algebra 2 course in sophomore year. Some do it freshman year and they switch things up and they have geometry. You do not need to have pre-calculus to take these tests. If a child is taking Algebra 2 as a junior, certainly the ACT and SAT is likely to be a spring, summer, fall endeavor. But most kids do it after in 10th grade and are ready to from a content perspective, to take the ACT or the SAT.
We have a question about this. What's going on with the UC schools?
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, what day is it, Leslie? I'll tell. What day is it? We have to update it every day.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
On Tuesday, November 17th. Yes.
Right. Barry can tell me if I have gotten the most up-to-date info. I think I have. But so this is an interesting thing. The UC schools have pledged to do away, pre-COVID, they pledged to do away with the SAT and ACT and replace those tests with either their own standardized test, which they haven't figured out. And they say if they can't figure that out, they'll replace it with no standardized tests. So that's sort of a 5-year plan that's already was being laid out before COVID. Because of COVID, the UC schools, a couple of them went test blind, and they all sort of went test optional, right? So send them if you have them, we want to see them, but you don't have to. And they were taken to court It was ruled that they could not do that, that it was discriminatory to those students who weren't able to test because they had special accommodations and there weren't enough testing sessions, and that they have to be test blind this year. They appealed it. As far as I know, the appeal was denied, and they are not allowed to take SAT or ACT scores this year. Bari, is that?
So that is almost everything. So that all is correct. And then there's just a little extra, which is that in particular, that there are 3 campuses that are fighting against this. And it's not a final decision. I don't have the legal terminology, but whatever the last ruling was, there's still an opening technically. And 3 campuses have actually pushed back and said, we want to use them. And that's UCLA, it's UC Davis, and UC San Diego. So the other places have just said, we're going to be test blind. You know, Cal, Berkeley is like, we're just going to be test blind. UCLA is trying to fight for it. And so it really is technically, the door is still open for those 3 campuses. So it depends which UCs you're interested in. You know, listen, obviously time is ticking, but literally, I mean, this happened, the most recent thing was like last week or a week and a half ago, and it keeps moving, and it's changed at least 3 times in this cycle already. And so you do have to, just like everything else in 2020, you have to keep an open mind and be flexible, but that's where it's at now.
We have a lot of questions about kind of the application process and admissions, but for one other question kind of, and we'll have other questions on testing, but while we're talking about testing, the AP testing. So if your school doesn't give AP, should you be taking it outside of school? Can you talk about the importance of the AP test and how it,
Yeah, the APs are sort of a mix of standardized testing, because there is this exam at the end of this course, and an academic. These are academic courses that are given at school, and they follow the AP curriculum set out by the College Board. And lots of schools have AP classes and some don't have AP classes. And some of the ones that don't have AP classes still offer AP exams at the end of the year for their kids, and some don't. And you know, for our kids, there's a few things we advise. One is that no matter what, the rigor of your classes is what's important. And if your school doesn't have AP courses, it will never be held against you that you're not taking AP classes. And if you are taking AP classes, I do think sending an AP score at the end of the year is kind of like a period at the end of the sentence. Is it absolutely required? No, no one requires AP scores. But it's a nice thing to show at the end of an AP class, and it can certainly earn you college credit. And it's another little feather in your cap, though, again, a small piece of your testing portfolio. If your school doesn't offer AP classes and there aren't AP exams at school, there's no reason to sit for AP exams unless you really want college credit. I think it's probably not the best use of your time, given that they're long tests, they're hard tests, and they do require real preparation. And so for those students, they would really have to think through what the cost of that, using that time for APs is, unless Bari disagrees from an admissions perspective.
No, you know, I agree. If your school doesn't offer it, then why are you going in and taking it? You know, there's really no reason. And the APs, you know, the APs are valued because they're often, and less so now, but they're often just the highest level available at a high school. So if it was called something else or there was some other thing, then that's what's valued. And so many schools have moved away, particularly private schools have moved away from the AP curriculum. So it really doesn't matter in that regard. I never encourage people to take them outside, even though at some schools, particularly here in New York City, you know, kids will be, it's more typical for kids to be taking these AP exams outside, even though the school doesn't offer it, but there really is no benefit to it. The other thing I would say about AP scores is that also, again, it depends on where you're applying. So if you're applying to more selective schools, to highly selective or selective schools, if you do take an AP course, then, you know, you would expect to see the corresponding AP exam. And we would want to see a 4 or 5, ideally 5s, but if you can send 4s, you don't want to send 3s or anything lower than that to a highly selective school, in which case you would not submit that score. They would notice, okay, well, we've got, this kid took, you know, 4 APs and I see 3 scores. The assumption is that last one didn't go as well, but better not to show it than to hand it to them on a platter, basically. But at highly selective schools, when you are taking AP courses, I think, they're looking for it because it's just expected that you took it at the end. But it's better not to submit a low score than to just submit one, regardless. So I think it depends on where you're applying. If you're applying to a selective place, for instance, a good example, let's say an Ivy versus a Michigan. Michigan, you can just send whatever you want or not send. They're not going to be picky about it. But if you're looking at an Ivy or an Ivy level place, they are paying closer attention and they are more nitpicky. And so you want to try and think, hey, when I take this course, how could I do on the AP exam? And then the good news for seniors is that they won't see those scores in time. And so whatever AP exams you're taking as a senior, the tests themselves are kind of a non-issue.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to some application questions, and specifically there's a question for you, Bari. It says, Bari, you mentioned the news is slowly trickling in from different schools as far as admissions, early action, early decision. As a mom of a senior who's already submitted applications to some of her early decision schools, do you feel that admissions will be tougher this year for our seniors? Same. What is your thought of as far as acceptance, especially to reach schools for our seniors?
Yeah, I think that the highly selective schools are going to be more competitive. I mean, they have to be, because we had said, we expected the surge in applications, which it seems is bearing out, although again, the data is just trickling out. Some of those applications are nonsense applications. They're people who, are never getting in, never were getting in, never getting in with test optional. It's a Hail Mary, fine. There's always going to be a kind of a piece of that applicant pool that falls into that. But can you imagine, and I know there are people out there listening right now who fall into this bucket, there are so many students who have beautiful transcripts, amazing extracurricular activities, but their testing, let's say, was stuck in like the mid 1400s, which is a really respectable score, but it's not doing anything for you at an Ivy League school, or like what we call a little Ivy, the places that are essentially just as competitive, but not part of that athletic league. Those kids have a chance now. And why wouldn't you throw your hat in the ring now that you actually have a fair shot? Whereas before you wouldn't have even wasted your time. And so those kids are actually competitive, and so it's going to be more competitive. The numbers themselves, I was saying, last spring when everything started going test optional, I was like, people are going to fall over themselves when they hear the admit rates next year, because this is going to be bonkers, like in terms of how many people apply. And again, the thing is that these kids actually have a chance of getting in. Now, we still would say if you can submit scores and present typically, if you want to call it that, that's your best bet, because again, we can predict better that way, and you're giving them more what they know what to do with. When I talk with my colleagues on the other side, on the admission side, they're very honest and say, this is totally new for us. Like, we don't know what we're doing yet. We're learning as we go. They don't even know on their end, but what they do know is that the applications are up, that they're going to be able to consider students that they wouldn't have been able to consider before, from a lot of different demographics, by the way. This will benefit everybody to some degree, and it's also going to hurt everybody to some degree. So I think that's going to be more competitive is the short answer for sure. But I think the numbers themselves are going to show one thing. And you do have to remember that a certain portion of those applications are going to be sort of the throwaways regardless. But of any applicant pool, those numbers actually are not that high. It's always like a small little sliver. And even in this case, kids who don't have the grades even, some of them are going to throw their hat in the ring regardless. But when you don't have the grades and you're not submitting scores, most people will come to the conclusion that it's not the best use of their time to apply. So I do think that we're in for an interesting cycle.
And how will deferrals from last year impact admissions this year?
It's going to depend on the school. So one thing that we've seen is that, a lot of places aren't actually reporting such a crazy number of deferrals. And then some are. Not surprisingly, the more selective schools have higher numbers of deferrals. Those kids found interesting things to do and were more motivated to make something else happen and put things off. We've seen at the Ivies 5- and 7-fold increases in the number of deferrals. At places like Michigan, it was 217 deferrals this year, which was as many as the past 5 years combined. But it's not going to impact them. They've over enrolled before by about that much. They can absorb numbers like that at a place like Michigan. And most places are saying there's going to be no impact. I think that there's going to be some impact. I don't think it's a tit for tat where a school that has, 151 deferrals, they're going to take 151 fewer kids. It doesn't work that way. But I think that some schools are going to have to be impacted because it's just a space issue. You actually have to have space for these students. And we also know that more sophomores and juniors took leaves, which means they're going to be in the cycle for a little bit longer. And so it really depends on the school. But if I remember correctly, also Tulane had said earlier in the year, I was on a call with them, and they were saying, they normally have about 30, and this year they had maybe a little over 40. Those are numbers that are insignificant. That doesn't matter. So you really have to look at the individual school, but the more selective schools had more deferrals for sure in general.
There's certainly a surge in applications, but how has the application review process potentially changed in light of COVID?
So this is an interesting question. What was important before remains important. So we're always focusing on academics first. That's the rigor of your curriculum and the grades that you earn based on what's available to you at your high school. After that, ideally, there's some testing there if you can give it and if it's strong. If it's not, it's obviously not a piece of the equation. After that, listen, decisions have always been made really on the soft factors, because if the academics weren't there, if the academics and the testing held you back, like you were basically done at that initial academic review, they would read your application, but I can tell you they read it a lot faster. And I did the same thing when I was in admissions. So they can move a little bit quicker because they know what's going to happen. So even though they'll say we read every application, every application goes to committee, or every application gets equal consideration, they can move a little bit more quickly when you really don't make the cut academically. So for all those people who do make the cut academically, which in most cases is a vast majority of the applicant pool, how are decisions made? And this is what makes everybody scratch their head about college admissions in general. And it really comes down at the end of the day about how good of an applicant you are, how well you execute. So it's your essays primarily, because that's how they get to know you. It's the only opportunity you have to speak. We know that interviews are not evaluative, so those aren't a significant component. Your recommenders, the more selective the school, the more important recommendations are, and those things are going to be amplified this year. So what you can say about yourself in your essays, and the way that you say it, and how you tailor it to each school, and tailoring is not simply, changing the name of the classes you're interested in, or the professor you want to work with, or a club that you wanted to get involved in, but how well you tailor them and connect with the people on the other side at every school, and then what your recommenders are saying, and that it all actually jives together. That is going to be crucial. Extracurriculars are always important, and the more selective the school, the higher the expectations are with extracurriculars, but that's also a space where admissions is going to be flexible this year just because everything was so disrupted. But they do expect that you're going to be productive with your time. They have not given a free pass by any means. So you do need to be doing things, and this goes for seniors who are in the process right now, and for the kids who are younger, juniors, sophomores, freshmen. The expectation is that you are doing something with your time, and maybe it's going to zig and zag a little bit in a way that it didn't before until things settle down in the spring or summer. But you should absolutely be doing things. Don't say, well, my activity was canceled, and so I just couldn't do it. Figure something else out for sure.
If you have a specialty, such as, you've been specializing in music, is it appropriate to reach out to, let's say, the music department directly, for extracurricular? How can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, students often ask about these additional artistic portfolios or additional information. And again, it gets back to where are you applying? If you're applying to a highly selective school, the work should be exceptional. And if it's not truly exceptional, don't bother submitting it, because admissions officers don't know the difference. They're like me, they're generalists. Like, I know if it's really bad, but I don't know, once it's really good, I don't know the nuances between really good and excellent. You know, I can't tell lighting from photography, or, you know, some kind of, you know, anything specific about music or art or anything like that. And admissions officers are the same way. But at the more selective schools, they pop that stuff over to the faculty, who then tell them, yeah, this is actually good, or nah, this isn't so great for us. And so if you're going to put something forward, it should stand out wherever you're applying. But remember that unless you're applying to a portfolio-based program, this is primarily an academic competition. So if you're this amazing, amazing artist, but the grades aren't there and the scores aren't there, it's not going to matter. And so I think to me, students should submit things that enhance their candidacy and enhance their application. More is not necessarily better. The more you throw on it, the longer a person has to take to read the application, which you better make it worth their time. So if you're filling out additional information and giving them a little bit of extra info there, if you're going to submit an art portfolio, if you're going to give them an extra recommendation, these people need and want to move fast. Your essays need to be clear and readable quickly. Once you have to reread something because you can't follow something because the language is so flowery, or, you know, it's like saying everything and nothing at the same time, and you're kind of like going back, which I see all the time in drafts that students submit to me. Once you make an admissions officer have to work harder, again, it better be worth their time. And so don't just throw extra stuff thinking like, let me just send this in because extra is better. And if you're going to contact the department directly, also, you better be ready, right? Whether you're talking about art or history or, you know, whatever, French language, you're going to pick up the phone or shoot an email over to a college professor and say you actually want to talk to them. You better be ready to talk, and talk very, very, very thoughtfully and smartly about what you're interested in.
Great. We have a very specific question about admissions for the class of 2022. Can you make any conjectures about developments in the college admissions process for high school class of 2022?
I think for 2022, like, let's write the headline now. Many colleges are going to stay test optional, but that doesn't mean that it's like an equitable sort of test optional for everybody. It literally is, it is, but you should think hard about when you see a school as test optional, whether or not you should forego the tests. And so it is an option for you to not submit them, but should you not submit them, the answer to that question may in fact be different. And so I think one thing that will change is you're going to see a lot of these schools keep the testing policy of test optional in place for next year. It will make logical sense because there will be closures and there will be difficulties for students testing. It's also going to give colleges a lot of what they want, which is an increase in applications, lower admit rates, and the ability to build a more diverse class. And so there's every reason for colleges to technically keep the policy in place. But just like pre-COVID, when colleges were test optional, we didn't then say to students, oh, you're interested in, you know, Bowdoin and Bates and a few other schools at the top of your list, you don't need to worry about the tests, they're optional. We never said that. And the same will be true afterwards. So when you see the news media make a big deal about, oh my God, there's, you know, 2/3 of colleges were, you know, or it's like over 70% of colleges now are test optional. And if you see that number stay about the same next year and people start saying, oh, the testing is out, I agree with Sasha. I don't think that testing is going anywhere any so quickly. It will give some people some flexibility that didn't exist before, but you really need to think about individually, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, and I should say, I think a lot of people are going to hop back on the test required next year. It's going to depend a lot on what the winter and spring look like, but there is so much time for our juniors. And so again, I would be prepared to send, and then you might luck out, right? But if you're going to take, you know, I wouldn't take a risk because I think you're going to likely need these scores.
No, 100%. We're not telling any of our students not to prepare. You prepare, again, just like before, right? There were test optional schools before. Test optional in and of itself is nothing new. But even though there were test optional schools, even if they were top of your list, you still prepared and tried to do as well as you could. And ideally were submitting scores. And that absolutely is the case. I think the tricky thing will be is that some colleges are going to make an announcement, in February, right? They're going to make an announcement about next year in the midst of things that'll probably suggest, yes, keep the test optional open. Colleges that announce maybe later and wait, you may see a little bit more flexibility. But I think, listen, we know already, and we don't know what's going to happen in the next few months, and that's going to be a big factor. But it wouldn't be surprising if places kept it open at least for another year. And maybe again, if not beyond that, but that absolutely should not make you think in your head that it's a pass, because it's not. It's actually, and so many of the colleges, by the way, went test optional, like kicking and screaming. They did it because they had to, and it was the right thing to do. And it's absolutely what they should have done. But it'll also depend how they find reading without it. The places that are getting 65,000 applications this year might be more like 80,000 applications. They have to see how they can do it. But it's in their interest to technically stay test optional.
This is a hard question. What is the advice you're giving to parents regarding next summer? What should you be doing? How can you be planning?
Gosh, that's amazing to plan for next summer, Bari. Tell us what to do next summer. Tell me.
So right. Well, in 2020, we're in a regular year. So we normally start planning summer like sometimes end of November, beginning of December. But, for instance, the Yale Young Global Scholars Program, their early action deadline already passed. And so there are programs that a lot of students are interested in that are sometimes well worth people's time and good for their profiles that have these early deadlines. And so it forces us to think about it sooner than we would like, or that we would think is necessary. And then there are so many things where you don't have to think about it for a long time. I would say, listen, by February in general, in a regular year, you don't want to be scrambling, because there'll be programs that are closed, deadlines that have passed. It's really a December, January-ish kind of thing in general. Obviously, we don't know what is going to be next summer. We have seen that some programs have already announced that they're virtual for for summer 2021. And we've also seen some programs announce that their intention is to be in person in summer 2021. And all of this, obviously the in-person programs, it's all up for flexibility and change depending on what happens with the vaccine and depending what this winter looks like. So, this has to be a flexible year. I think, like a lot of other things, with the exception of programs that actually have earlier deadlines, people's decision making is going to shift a little bit later. But you have to plan as if, right? You can't just say, well, I'm just not going to plan right now, because you will miss deadlines and you will miss opportunities. And I do think that we'll see more programs in person than last year, that we'll be in a position. We already are in a position, and we have a lot more data about kids and transmission, and we see how colleges have managed it on their campuses. And so we would expect to have more in-person options I keep saying fall. I'm so into the fall, right?
For summer.
For summer 2021. That's
fair. Should we take a look at some of the questions? It's been hard to kind of look at
here's a question: no subject test for Amherst, Williams, etc. Correct.
Do foreign schools still require subject tests or APs?
Foreign schools, yes. Yeah. Is that what you said?
Yes, foreign schools.
Yes, international students are still sending subject tests often as a requirement.
Do they mean if you want to apply like to the UK, or do they mean if you're international? Oh. I don't see the question.
It just do foreign schools still require
foreign schools? So like St. Andrews is test optional. So are a lot of the Canadian schools. So they've also moved towards test optional. Testing plays a very different role in those places than it does here. It's more of a rubric in a lot of ways, but they've had to adjust because the pandemic is global.
Regarding your comment about the increase in ED applications this year, for example, Columbia being up 49%, is it solely the test optional policy that is driving this increase, or would you And would you expect ED applications to go back to pre-COVID rate in future years? Or is this a new trend you expect to stick? In addition, does this mean the entire application pool will increase because students are applying to more schools, or simply a shift to more ED applications?
So it's going to be a mix, right? So we don't know. We'll see. If you look out, 1-2 years from now, will the ED numbers go down? One thing we've seen when schools go test optional is that the first 2 years in particular, applications go up a pretty decent amount. They don't go down after that. They just kind of like level out. Is this something similar? We don't know exactly. We'll also see, and this is not something that's really an issue for the Ivies, but we will likely see schools filling a little bit more of their class in early this year than they do in other years. That might be something that gets pulled back. We saw that in around 2008, 2009 as well with the recession. So there'll be things that kind of get pulled back a little bit. Listen, the competitiveness of these schools isn't going away. We would have expected, if this was a normal year, just like any other year, that it would have ticked up a bit. It would have, the admit rate would have ticked down a bit, and we would have been on a similar cycle. This is just going to make it more competitive in this moment. But we'll also see if these test optional policies stay in place, then that's going to mean something. Again, even though we still encourage everybody to prepare for the test and to try and get the highest score they possibly can, because it will benefit you if you can present that. But I think there's a lot of things sort of that will feed into whether or not we see it going forward. And as far as the regular pool goes, yeah, sure, we would expect students to be applying to more schools in regular. A, because it will be less predictable with all this test optional stuff. And B, because students really truly do have more realistic options in theory and in practice. And so we would expect that.
The fact that many schools are offering sports, does that mean they are not recruiting? And if so, does that open up more sports normally allocated for athletes?
No, so we work with recruited athletes, and there were students this year, swimmers, fencers, where the programs were cut at their school and the recruiting just stopped for it. And it didn't give more spaces to other places. To other sports. There were even instances where coaches were clear with our recruits that they had normally X number of spots. They were waiting to get their number based on deferrals and things like that, factoring into how many spots a particular coach had. But it wasn't like, if let's just to use round numbers, there were 100 athletes that came in, that if they cut fencing and swimming and that freed up 8 spots, that they then distributed them to other coaches. No, they just went away and that was it.
Is it best for the two recommendations to come from your junior year teachers?
So recommendations need to come from core academic subject areas. So English, history, math, science, or foreign language. And they should be from grades 11 or 12. It can be from a 9th or 10th grade teacher, but they need to have also taught you in 11th or 12th grade. And people might say, why or how can I get a 12th grade teacher recommendation? They're not going to have known me for barely any time when they would write. Colleges want to hear about the person you are now. They're most interested in who they're going to get in the fall. And these teacher recommendations are supposed to be academic, intellectual recommendations. And so if you think about a 9th or a 10th grader compared to a 12th grader, there's such a huge gap and there's such a big developmental difference. And so they don't want to hear about what they consider almost to be like the baby version of you. They want to know, and hopefully intellectually you've developed and advanced and you're better than you were in 9th or 10th grade when you're in 11th or 12th grade. So they actually would prefer to hear from a teacher who has known you for less time, but knows you in your current in your current state, so to speak, and can speak to who you are intellectually right now. And so that's why it's not a character reference where the longer they know you, the better the recommendation could be. This is actually not about you as a person really at all. It's about you as a student and you as a thinker. And they want to know what they're going to get, as a freshman. And so they want to hear. And that's by the way.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and that, by the way, is why senior year grades are also the most important, is because they're the closest. The classes are the highest. This is the closest you're going to be to being a freshman. Let's see what you got and what you can do. Go ahead, Sasha. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say your high school counselor is writing sort of more of the overview of you as a person, as opposed to you as an intellect or student. So that is being taken into account by your college counselor. And I noticed a lot of different kinds of questions about 9th and 10th grade, Bari, like how does it matter the rigor, or does it matter the grades? And I think for us, it's always about the level of selectivity of the schools you're applying to. I mean, everything from 9th grade on does count. They see it all. But of course, as Barry is always saying, it's the 11th grader and the 12th grader that they're really looking at to see where you'll be in the fall of freshman year. I don't know if you have more ideas about how important 9th and 10th are versus.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it goes back to, like Sasha said, where are you applying? And the more selective, the more nitpicky they are. And so they're going to be paying closer attention to everything, and there's less flexibility in their process as a result. And so 9th and 10th grade, if you had a rough 9th and 10th grade year and you picked it up in 11th and 12th, that's great. And they're going to see the upward trend, but you can't expect a highly selective school to kind of say, okay, well, we'll just look at 11th and 12th and we'll, kind of disregard 9 and 10. They don't do that. So in an ideal world, you're starting out 9th grade strong, which is why 8th graders should be thinking about, what courses am I picking? What track is that going to put me on? What kind of grades do I expect to earn in these classes that I've signed myself up for in 9th grade? And more so, where am I going to end up in 12th grade? Where does it leave me there? And what will I have taken, or how high will I have gone? Sometimes when it comes to things like foreign language, students don't want actually to be at like Spanish 5 in 12th grade, because it's going to be too much for them, And so there's a lot of things to think about in advance, but we're always looking for the greatest amount of rigor. To use a very extreme example, if your school did offer, let's go back to the AP example, if your school did offer AP classes, and a bunch of them, and you took none of them but got straight A's, like, you're not going to find yourself with any great options as a result. They're going to see it as either you were lazy and didn't take advantage of what was offered to you, or you couldn't handle it, neither of which will work in your favor. So what you want to try and do, regardless of what your academic interests are take the most rigorous courses available in the 5 core areas at your high school, while also managing to get the strongest possible grades. And what strong grades mean depends on where you're applying. And so it's really like a little bit of a seesaw, that you're trying to balance.
I remember from an academic perspective, things build on themselves too. So setting yourself up for success in 9th grade, it matters a lot for, we were talking about this with COVID, like, you still have to do algebra 2 after algebra, and you still need to do chemistry after bio. And so, these things do build on each other. And so setting yourself up has to do with course selection, and also has to do with really making sure as a 9th grader, you learn the skills to be a successful student. Because 9th grade isn't a freebie year, but it is the year that you're developing the skills to make sure that 10th, 11th, and 12th grade are as flawless as they can be. And so I do think that's when we set our kids up for success, is sort of that cusp of 8th and 9th grade.
Yeah. And Sasha, there's a question, if it's easy, do you recommend taking an SAT 2 in 9th or 10th grade?
So yeah, I mean, normally very, very few students take subject tests in 9th grade. I mean, we have a bio student every year who's just meant to take it in 9th grade. And so for me, easy, sure. Anything that's easy and doesn't detract from a child's ability to sleep and get their grades and do soccer and do all the things they're supposed to do, easy wins. I'll always take them. I'll take them in 9th grade. I'll take them in 10th grade. But most are not easy wins in 9th grade. Sometimes you get a great, bio or chem in 10th grade, or Latin or world history. Every kid is different. And overwhelmingly, I like to get things done when they're easy. I don't like to rush things. And I think the subject tests are a small piece of this whole puzzle. So we just have to treat them as such.
Yeah, I agree. Also, for those of you who might be taking, let's say, like an honors bio or an advanced bio in 9th, but then you're going to take like an advanced bio or an AP bio, whatever in 11th, wait until 11th when you're going to be you'll have more knowledge under your belt. You'll be able to get a higher score easier, if the subject tests even still exist at that point.
Yes, and by the way, most of the kids taking the bio are 11th graders doing quite well. So those 9th graders are at a disadvantage. But as I said, it's about your kid. There's always that kid. I'm like, you won't want to do the bio. And then they show me wrong and they do great. And that's great. But overwhelmingly, kids aren't even thinking about subject tests in 9th grade. Maybe they're thinking about 1 or 2 in 10th grade. They're doing the majority in 11th or even the fall of senior year because they are focused on their grades, their ACT or SAT scores, their extracurriculars, getting some sleep, some time in there. So again, I'm all for easy wins, but there's usually a trade-off, and I'm very careful about having kids test too early and test against older kids.
Yeah, the key is the easy part, right? And it's easiest usually the older you are and the more it coincides with the appropriate curriculum.
Sasha, do engineering schools have different testing requirements?
No, I mean, historically, they've expected an ACT or an SAT, and then they've expected 2 subject tests, usually the math level 2 and either a physics or a chem. And they've really expected, I mean, Barry can say, but 800s. I mean, they really wanted those, like, the math and the science. At this point, they don't require them, and some of them are test blind. MIT got rid of them, Caltech got rid of them. So no, at this point, it's really about an ACT or SAT score.
Barry, have any schools with restrictive early action, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, MIT, announced whether numbers went up for REA applications?
MIT is not REA, it's just regular early action. You can apply to as many schools as you want, they don't care. The other ones are REA, and no, they have not announced numbers yet. They really have just come out like just barely, like in the last week, and we'll likely start hearing more in the coming week or so.
Other questions that I haven't covered that you are seeing here? Sorry.
See if there's anything else. I know we're a little bit over time, so we'll try and wrap up quickly, but let's see. I think pretty much, there's a question about favorite summer plan. It totally depends on the student. What a good summer plan is. It depends what they're interested in, what their goal school is. Like, it's a very, very particular thing. And it depends what year you are in high school. There's certain things appropriate for 9th and 10th graders that I would never have an 11th grader or rising 12th grader do. So that depends. And then
there was a question about if you're looking at, if you're from, like, I think if you're looking at the United States for schools, how do you find a good school? So
if you are applying from out of this country, you're going to be in for a real, like, mind-blowing experience because the way the US does college and university admissions is unlike anywhere else in the entire world, literally. We're the anomaly amongst everybody else. And so just as a very quick thing, there's a holistic process. It's about fit. How well do they think you fit at their school, which has nothing to do with how well they think you can be successful academically. So it's really in so many ways like 180 degrees different than wherever you're sitting in the world, whatever they do in your home country. And so I would just say you have to really become familiar with the process and really research every school to death and make sure you really understand them in a way beyond what they offer academically, which is the primary focus pretty much everywhere else. And so just becoming more knowledgeable about the process in general, and then in each individual school. And then for international students, especially an advisor, a US-based advisor is particularly helpful just because it really is so incredibly different from whatever it is that you're used to. But that's sort of what
they're deeply unfamiliar as well. I mean, the kids really have no experience with this kind of testing overwhelmingly. And sometimes there's also language obstacles as well, but even when there aren't, they're just really unfamiliar.
For sure. A question here, what do you use as the definition of highly selective? Do any NESCACs fall in your definition? Absolutely, absolutely. Most of the NESCAC schools would be considered highly selective. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And of course, you can always submit questions, and we'll try to continue doing these as the year progresses and as we have more. We were very intentional about not doing too many and to only do these webinars when there was actually more to report, as opposed to just rehashing the same stuff. And so we'll be back with new and current data as it comes out.
I can't thank you enough, both Bari and Sasha, for your time. Really productive evening.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Bari. It's been such a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Good luck to everybody. Hang in there.
Hang in there.
We're
Yeah.
all in this together. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.